Okay, well, thank you. Um, okay, well, this is a presentation on writing journal papers. I've given this before at White Elephant occasions, but also used it for students at various places. The presentation was originally prepared by Elsevier, specifically for the ISPRS journal, but it's been modified a little bit and tailored to specific requirements. I'm trying to advance it and it's not going. Ah, here we go. Okay, and of course I don't think I need to say more about other journals. So say it was prepared for the ISPRS journal, but the same principles apply for any journals and also writing conference papers. There's a number of principles which are important, whatever occasion you're writing a journal for. So the first thing that you need to consider when writing a journal is whether it is publishable. Is it going to be accepted by the referees and the editor? And obviously, if it doesn't meet these requirements, then you're probably wasting your time in preparing a journal in the first place. So I'm going to first of all talk about that, then how we should write a good journal, and some conditions which go with it. So just to remind you first of all of what happens. You write a paper, submit it to the editor, who then passes it on to reviewers, who will make comments and eventually make a recommendation as to whether the paper should be published. Now there are basically four options for referees to recommend. They can recommend acceptance, without any changes. Obviously, that's something that you hope will happen. There could be some minor revision, a more major revision, or it could be rejected. And those decisions, the editor will make the decision on the basis of the recommendations from the reviewers. So what is the sort of paper which is going to be acceptable? And there's basically two types of papers, but probably students or postdocs would probably be writing the papers to publish something which is new and original. There is the other option, which is to publish a review, but that is probably something which is likely to be done more by people with more experience in the field. So what are editors looking for? Specifically, originality, significant advances in the field, new methods which should be supported by case studies. But of course, as well as having the right content, you've also got to have the right paper. So editors are going to be looking for something which can be read, which doesn't have to have a lot of editing. And also, of course, there are certain conditions which need to be met, things such as plagiarism, duplication, and so on. And I'll certainly talk more about that later. Remember that there are some things which are not generally wanted. Duplicates of previous papers are not acceptable. They obviously have to have some scientific interest and be up to date. A paper needs to be complete, covering the areas of the title, and it has to be backed up by data. But just remember that just because it's not been done before doesn't mean it can be done now. Okay, it still has to be, it still has to have the right novelty about it and the right content and the right way of writing it. So the paper may be well written, but if nothing wrong with the way it's written, but again, it has to have something new, and it has to be sort of established. So we're looking really for innovative methods, innovative use of existing methods. Now, don't forget that if you don't feel very competent about writing paper in good English or good German or whatever it happens to be in, there's ways of helping you to do that, and that's something which needs to be considered. So these are the sort of things that you should be looking at. So if you've got something new, interesting, if you can show that your work is something new and well done, then you can start writing your paper. So let's talk about how to go about writing a good journal paper. First thing, absolutely essential, is that you read the guide for authors. They will tell you what sort of length the paper should be, how it should be set out, what format it should be in, and so on. And don't forget that editors are going to be receiving a lot of manuscripts, and if manuscripts do not start off by complying with the guidelines which have been given, they're much more likely to be rejected. You want to create a good impression with the editor from the word go. Okay, you don't want him to be thinking, oh God, this might be an interesting paper, but it's so badly written I can't be bothered to take it any further. So make sure that you set it out according to the guidelines, and say follow the guides which are given. Well, that's to say, we want the editor needs to be impressed. So how do you construct your manuscript? There'll be some initial things like the title, the authors, and so on, and these will normally be specified how to do this, but of course you can always look at articles, previous articles from the journal, and follow those. But the most important thing is clearly going to be the main text, where there are these four basic components. You need an introduction, you need to have a methodology, what you've actually done, you need the results, and then you need some discussion and conclusions. And then this will then be followed up by some things like acknowledgement, references, and any other material which might be included. So the first bits need to be accurate, and again, don't forget that you want to make a good impression on the editor from the beginning. So do what the guidelines say. Make sure that what you do is accurate. Then you need to follow the main body, which has a distinct purpose, and then follow it up with the final bits. So first of all, your title. Again, remember that you are initially trying to make an impression on the editor and the reviewers. So you want a title which conveys what you're trying to put over, but not too long and not too confusing. So be specific, be concise, but try and be complete. Again, initially, of course, you've got to impress the editor, but you also want readers to be interested. You need to attract their attention and get people to read your paper. So don't use unnecessary jargon. Okay, make it clear, concise. Don't use abbreviations in your title unless they're very, very common. Don't be ambiguous. Don't make them too long with unnecessary detail. So here's a couple of examples. The first example here gives a very sort of complete picture, but nobody wants to read such a long title. It doesn't immediately grab the reader, and it has unnecessary information. So what you're actually saying is that you're comparing 3 methods for classifying algae under various pollution gradients. So that's clear and concise. So after the title, you need an abstract. And again, you want the same principles as for the title, but obviously the abstract's going to be a bit longer. It's going to give more detail, but it still needs to be as concise as possible. It needs to give an honest, precise, clear view of what you're doing. It shouldn't contain technical jargon, and you shouldn't use unnecessary abbreviations, and you don't put references in your title. But again, purpose of the abstract is to get people to read what you are talking about. Now you may be asked to provide keywords. This varies from journal to journal, or conference to conference. But remember that the keywords, again, are there to attract people to what you're doing, but also, of course, so that if somebody is searching keywords in a conference manuscript, a conference journal, for example, or indeed in a journal, you need to attract them. So it needs to obviously be concise. You don't want abbreviations, again, you don't want words like methodology, texture, urban, because they are very general. They're not going to attract particularly towards your paper, your paper of interest. So again, follow the rules. There will be rules as to what the guidelines should be. Follow those in your presentation. So then you come on to the main part of the article. You need an introduction. Now, do not simply repeat your abstract in the introduction. You want a little bit of context to what you're doing. You want to make it clear as to what the problem you are attacking. But this is, again, where you need to show that what you're doing is original, that it's new, and make it quite clear that what is your work. Don't try and sort of make it look as that somebody else's work is part of what you're trying to do. Make it clear, and make it clear what you have contributed to this article. You'll need a literature review, which again has to be correct, and make sure too that if you're giving abbreviations, that they're going to be well understood. I mean, there are some abbreviations which clearly are well understood, but others may not be. So make sure that your abbreviations, your acronyms, are all explained. Don't put too much in your introduction. You obviously want to give a review of the field, put your work into context, but don't go overboard just to show how clever you are in understanding the whole field. And say, although you want to put over what you've been doing, don't oversell yourself in this way. just be reasonable. Okay, this is just an introduction, an example of the sort of introduction which you might have, but that is the sort of thing which is okay. It's got a reasonable use of references and giving a bit of context. But here we've got an example of something which is not so good. It's to solve a technical problem which is a bit inconvenient is not going to be a sort of high priority bit of research, and this type of thing doesn't show a great deal of originality. So say make sure that you're doing something new, and that you're solving a problem which is worthwhile solving. Now you come on to the next part of the paper, which is the methodology, and this is going to be the most important part. And a good principle here to follow is that you should have sufficient information so that somebody who is aware of the field, aware of the problem, could reproduce this experiment. Now, there may, of course, be some examples where there's copyright. If you've been funded and there might be some limits on what you can put in, then that might be a bit difficult. But again, somebody must be convinced that what you have done really could be done, and that they could at least attempt to reproduce it themselves. So you can put into this section any algorithms that you've used, developed. You obviously give statistics, and you may have descriptions of your experiments or case studies. Okay, and this is just an example of the sort of content that the methodology section might have. Now then, you obviously want to put over your results in the most effective way, and we all know that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So presenting information in a graphical or pictorial way is obviously something which you should be doing. But do make sure that any visualizations are understandable and clear. So some examples here. I mean, a table like this is obviously very complete, but it's also rather boring to have a long table in a paper, and if you can summarize the result, the information, then you can do that. And here's an example that this table can be summarized in a sort of relatively few words. It may be necessary to give detail, but it's best to put that maybe in an appendix or put it online, so where people can access it, so that you can see what the details are. You can present things as in other graphical way, again, which makes it clearer, and again, this is a better way of presenting information in a table than the whole table itself. Showing it graphically, again, need to be a little bit careful here. Here's an example of the data is being shown, but it's not easy to understand what's going on. You've got to look carefully at the symbols that are being used. You need to look carefully at the legends to understand what is happening. So that is a poor example. You can improve that by, here you can see that the information has been added on the legend, which makes that clear, but the data itself is still a bit confusing. So adding trend lines, joining up the object on the table makes it a whole lot clearer. So message here is, make sure that what you are presenting is going to be understood by the reader. Now then, you now come to the discussion, and this again is very very important. So you need to describe whether what you've done was successful, how they relate to other works, but also you must be able to show that you are understanding what you've done, and that if there are limitations, if there might have been some problems in what you did, you may not have been, the scope may not have been as wide as it could be. You need to show this. Don't hide information. That if somebody's going to ask questions, it's much better to have those questions answered in the presentation. And do avoid being overly enthusiastic about your work. For example, the example given there shows that this novel algorithm will massively increase the effectiveness of all image processing. Well, clearly this is a very ambitious statement, and that sort of statement is to be avoided. But also make sure that what is described in your discussion is being covered in the text itself. Don't suddenly decide to add something new into the discussion. We want to, this should be a resume and a conclusion, not something more. So make sure that you've put your work into context, show how it represents an advance in the field, look to the future, okay? What haven't you been able to do, but could be done in the future, and you can suggest how that could be done. Don't be too repetitive. If you've covered something fully in the main text of the article, then let it rest there without repeating it again. And don't be over speculative. Don't think beyond the box, and say don't overemphasize the importance of your work. So again, these are examples of the sort of conclusions which you want to avoid. Okay, so that's your main body of your paper completed, and you now need to sort of sum up, if you like, and sort of cover the other points which are necessary in a paper. There may be some acknowledgements. Excuse me. You may want to acknowledge someone who's awarded you a grant or paid for some of your work, who supplied materials or programs, helping with the English or one. So anybody who deserves, who's made a significant contribution, you need to cover that. Again, once you're going to have your references, and again, important things here. Make sure that it's correct. No author who is quoted wants to see their name misspelt or their details given incorrectly. And make sure that the format that you put your references in is the format which is set out in the guide. And again, you need correction. Having correct references is very important. Nobody is going to be impressed if they go to look up a reference and they find that they can't find it because the details in your paper have been wrong. So make sure that they're accurate and make sure that that they are relevant and complete. You can have a reference to personal communication. If somebody you've spoken to who's given you advice and given you information, you could, and you really think that they are worth mentioning, you can put a personal communication, but that should only be done. That should only be done in a limited way. And again, don't rely too much on citing your own work. Okay, a few other points. Again, I made the point before. You need to impress the editor and the referees from the word go. Get them interested in your journal and don't put them off by mistakes and poor English. So make sure that it looks good and that it reads well. And again, look for these three C's: clarity, conciseness, and correctness. But again, avoid too much repetition. Don't give information which is redundant, not necessary. Don't be ambiguous and don't exaggerate. Again, these are the sort of things which will annoy editors and put them off from your work. Okay, now the referees are going to be looking at your work. Obviously, the way in which a referee is asked to report is going to vary from journal to journal, but basically these are the sort of questions which a referee is going to be asked. He might be able to actually rate your paper from 1 to 5 or something like that, but the questions that are going to be asked is, first of all, is it appropriate for publication, whether it's in the ISPRS journal or anybody else? Is it technically correct? Is it new and innovative? So the referees are going to be looking to see whether they're going to be experts in their field. They're going to know what papers there are on this subject. So they're going to ask, is it really genuinely new? Has it been published before? And is it significant in the field that you're working with? And then they're going to say, well, are the results that you've reported on, are they going to be done soundly, correctly, and of course, are they correct? So these are the things that you've got to ask yourself. So just when you've written the paper, you've then got to actually look at it again and say, well, how is the referee going to look at this? Is he going to be impressed or not, or he or she? There's other things, but then there's the questions of whether the paper is well written, and things like, is the title correct, the abstract, and so on. But most importantly, are your conclusions sound and justified? Do they reflect what you've done? Make sure that that they do meet the criteria. And things like, are the references necessary? Are all the tables necessary? And so on. Many journals will have a mathematical editor who will check that your equations are correct and of course correct grammatically. So you've written your paper, you've submitted it, or let's put it the other way, you've written your paper, you've checked it, you've made sure that it's covering all the field, and you've submitted it. Then the next thing is you get a response from the editor. And the reviewers will have made some comments. If you're very lucky, the paper will be accepted and you don't need to do anything else. But the chances are that there will be some adjustments to be made. So you will have the referee's comments and you will have an opportunity to respond to that. Okay, and you should do this very, very carefully, so that you should answer each point that the referee has made, and you need to do that in a sort of sensible way, and you need to refer to each comment so that the referee can link his comments with your response. And it may be necessary that you need to do some extra work on this, but you would say do it politely. You don't want to be rude to the reviewer, and certainly you don't want to suggest that he doesn't know what he's talking about. So don't use the sort of comment that we have at the top of the slide here, but it can be worded in such a way to show that you disagree with it, and you're perfectly entitled to disagree with something that the referee has said, but make sure that you do it in a way in which demonstrates that you do really know what you're talking about, and that you can justify coming to a different comments. And again, we have some examples here of the sort of response that you might give. But again, this also demonstrates that you need to make clear, set it out well, so that the referee can see how your comments relate to his comments. Now, there's some other issues to be considered. There are some things which you absolutely must not do if you're submitting a journal. You must not submit the paper to more than one journal at once. You must not use plagiarism. You must not include work which has been done by others without proper justification. You can obviously quote other people, but make it quite clear that any particular statement is acknowledged and can be clearly seen. Obviously, you cannot fabricate data, include false information what you've got, and you must also make sure that all authors are properly recognised. So, on the question of multiple submissions, you might think that you submit something to 2 separate journals, that you'll get away with it, but editors talk to each other, and if a journal has been submitted to if a paper has been submitted to 2 journals, chances are that the editors will find out, and so you don't want to do that. And of course, if you do any of these things which I've just mentioned, you're going to get almost instant rejection. You can, of course, submit your paper to another journal if the first one rejects it. And it might be that it's rejected because the journal doesn't think it's suitable for that particular journal, rather than because there's something wrong with the paper itself. But if you do that, you should acknowledge the fact that it has been submitted somewhere else and rejected, but a reason that you think that it's worth rejecting, worth submitting again to another journal. Now, plagiarism is something which is taken very seriously nowadays. Everybody wants credit for what they've done. So if you're quoting what other people do, you must properly acknowledge this. You must certainly never put somebody else's conclusions as suggest that it's that they're your own. And a paper which has a significant amount of plagiarism will almost certainly be rejected. And of course, you know that there is software now which identifies plagiarism, so there's no hiding from doing that. And there's references that you can follow up to find more about that. And incidentally, ISPRS has recently issued its own advice on plagiarism. Again, you can of course paraphrase somebody else's work, but you have to do that in such a way that it's not making too much of the other person's work, and even if you cite it, it can still be considered plagiarism. Authorship should be acknowledged. Someone who's made a significant contribution should be acknowledged, and if they've made a significant contribution, then you can add additional authors. Okay, so that's pretty much what I wanted to cover. But as a summary of that, there is a checklist here of points which are which you could consider. You need to be precise, attention to details, check and double check. This is extremely important, and I'm sure that you've been told this as far as your thesis or project reports are concerned. Always check it and double check it, and check your work. You must consider what the reviewer is going to think about it. You must be well presented in English or whatever language you're writing in. Presentation is important. If you are asked to revise it, make sure that you do, and do it properly. Proper acknowledgements. Work must be new, original, and previously unpublished. And again, when you're checking it, critically evaluate what you've done, and be sure that you don't go against the rules. No plagiarism, no duplication, and so on. So that's I say hopefully some useful information on how to write a paper, and so good luck with it when you start writing papers. Thank you.